And welcome to the Prescribing Prosperity Podcast with your hosts, John and Alex Soutsos. Gentlemen, good to see you again. It's been a while. Some things have happened, as they say.
Good to see you, Bill. Good to see Kim as well.
Good to see you, Bill, and Kim.
And Kim. And that brings us to Kim, everybody's favorite podcast guest. I'm just going to name him Canada's favorite podcast guest, Kim G C Moody, founder and director of Moodys Private Client, one of Canada's largest premier tax law and accounting firms. Gentlemen, good to see you. All jokes aside, there was an election. And elections, as one former president here used to say, have consequences. So let's start with y'all, John and Alex. What are the consequences of this election for Canada?
How do I say this and be politically correct? We had an economy that was sliding into oblivion, and the electoral outcome has not changed that destination.
We chose to steer into the skid.
That can work if you're a stunt driver, by the way. Okay, just so you know.
Yeah, we're not stunt drivers here, unfortunately. And it's interesting that we have Kim with us, who's from Alberta, and there's a lot of action in Alberta as a consequence of the election, and I'm sure he's going to fill us in on all the details. So we're really happy that Kim's aboard for the ride. But the economy here is in bad shape. The real estate is in bad shape. Job situations not good. But you know what happens with whenever your domestic political agenda is not working for you, you find a common foreign enemy and you focus on the enemy, and that way you can get unification and stir nationalism and fervor. And that's exactly what the playbook was for the Liberal Party in Canada. They redirected away from themselves, it's been just an economic disaster here. And they focused on the American president in order to stir nationalistic fervor, and they've succeeded. And as a result, we now have a new prime minister, but not a different economic or political agenda as much as they would like us to believe.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention before we get Kim's take on this that although everybody thinks the boogeyman is gone because Justin Trudeau is no longer the face of the Liberal Party and therefore the prime minister of the country, it's important to remember that Mark Carney was the primary political and economic advisor to the Trudeau government over the last 10 years. And so to say that this is going to be different is illogical. And to use a Leaf analogy, it is the same as running it back with the same core group of players and expecting a different result every single year. Kim will love that one because we know how much Kim loves to throw shade at the Toronto Maple Leafs. So at least you got a new building to look forward to, Kim. So for Canadians to expect that the economy and the situation that is currently existent in our country from the last 10 years is going to be materially different than the next 2 to 4 years, depending on how long this minority government stands, is quite frankly illogical and unlikely to be any different from.
It is quite logical, Alexander, because as I said, people have been stirred from a nationalistic perspective, and when nationalism comes up in any country, they set aside all their concerns about domestic issues. So the playbook by the Liberals was actually quite smart on their part to do this, and they pulled it off. And the problem is, what do? And we're in tough shape. And I'm not sure what we're going to do, but Kim's going to enlighten us on what's going to happen with taxes potentially, and what the implications are for Canadians. So why don't we begin with Kim and his thoughts on we gave everyone our thoughts. Kim, what are your thoughts on the outcome of the Canadian election?
Well, thanks, John and Alex and Bill. Nice to be here again. My overall thoughts are very similar to yours that you've already talked about. But before I get there, I'll tell you that the election results of April 28th. So, a few weeks ago, roughly. As my wife has noticed, I've been walking around like the Peanuts character, Pigpen. Alex, I don't know if Alex, you're old enough to remember
I know
Pigpen,
Pigpen.
but
Oh yeah.
yeah, okay. So he walks around with a dust cloud, right? And
Hmm.
and that's kind of been me. So I've been trying to, get out of that dust cloud, because obviously, it could be 4 years of this, I'll call it nightmare, continuing. So I think, to John's point, the Liberals, you have to hand it to them. It was smart electioneering. I think it was disgusting the way they did it in terms of the prorogation of Parliament, and the suspension of Parliament so that they could run, their Liberal leadership campaign on the backs of Canadians, and appoint, which it was a coronation. This was, the Liberal parties. It was not a leadership election, in my view. It was a coronation of who they wanted, which was Mark Carney, and then to turn the channel on the last 10 years of history of the Liberal Party, and the fact that our economy is in rough shape, our tax policies are in rough shape, and then all of a sudden change it to a nationalistic approach. There's a lot of history, not just in Canada, but around the world, that when you're able to, you know, change the channel to, or at least describe it to be a crisis, which, Mr. Carney and his minions were certainly able to. Um, how many days in a row is it? The crisis of a lifetime, which is such an exaggeration, but I hate to say it, it scared a lot of people, and it took all the logic away. And we need somebody who's smart and calm to get us through this national crisis. And unfortunately, my buddy Pierre was not able to pull it off, despite some significant improvements. But unfortunately, we were left with what it is today. And I just hope I'm not sure how, but I just hope it'll be a short term as opposed to a full term.
Well, Kim, it's refreshing to hear Prime Minister Mark Carney say that he's going to run Canada, unlike Justin Trudeau, he's going to run it like a business, but he's not going to have a budget. So how do we do that? How do we run a country like a business without a budget?
Well, two comments, that I'll make on that. One, Mr. Carney, despite his, he's a very intelligent guy, no question about it. But Mr. Carney doesn't have probably a day's worth of business experience. Like the two of you guys, and John, Alex, and Bill, you guys are entrepreneurs. I'm an entrepreneur. There's days where in the building of my business, I worried about making payroll. And, Mr. Carney does not have any of that risk-taking experience whatsoever. So to suggest that he knows how an economy runs and how business runs is total, utter crap. So that's the first comment I'll make. And the second thing, what was the second thing?
Running the country like a business without a budget.
Oh, running it like, yeah. Running without it. I just don't know how you do that. I mean, and I have to write my Financial Post article for next week, and that's the topic is the fact that they're not going to have a budget. I could somewhat forgive the Liberal Party for not having a budget during COVID, at the front end of COVID, when we didn't know what the hell we're dealing with, and they're shoveling money out the door, and I somewhat forgive them for that. But historically, to not have a budget soon after an election with a new governing party, new in this, there's not many examples in Canadian history, and I think it's almost unforgivable. And I'll say this in my article, that the lack of transparency is disgusting. It's deceptive, and it's
irresponsible.
The average Canadian, and the average Canadian should not put up with it. Unfortunately, this whole masking of it's a crisis of a lifetime, and we'll wait until the fall so that we can see what's going on. Total garbage. So anyhow.
It would be the equivalent of somebody getting in their car and saying, I'm going to drive across the country, but I'm going to do it without a map. Will you get there eventually? Maybe you're going to waste a lot of time and a lot of gas in the interim, though, because you're going to be zigzagging all over the place trying to figure it out as you go.
Or you end up in Hudson's Bay.
Now, I heard that. You sink the car like Michael Scott did in The Office. So it's not a good look for sure. But how did you? So why do you think the polls or the results of the election swung so wildly, Kim? Considering, going back to November, December, it was, virtually a slam dunk that it was going to be a majority conservative government, to go all the way from that to virtually a liberal majority. It is a minority, but for all intents and purposes, it is a liberal majority at this point, given the number of seats that they have. And should the NDP choose to be their pony horse again, then they will absolutely be able to prop them up into majority status. How do you think it swung so drastically in such a short period of time?
I'll give you my uneducated comments because I'm certainly not a politician. I'm not a pollster. But I do think, there's a large camp of liberal voters in Canada. We all know that. And in this case, I think Justin Trudeau had really poisoned the well quite badly for those liberal voters. And so the anybody but Trudeau crowd amongst the liberals, and even frankly, some liberals that would, they didn't want to go to the NDP because that's just, even though the distinguishment between the liberal and the NDP is almost non-existent. I think there is a large camp of the anybody but Trudeau crowd who are prepared to vote conservative. And so I think that, combined with a change in leadership where this guy comes across as being the calm, smart guy, experienced guy at the table, along with this nationalistic approach, crisis of a lifetime. I think that's unfortunately changed it. I'm still shocked and surprised, frankly, because that's such a big push, like big turnaround. You see how it's playing out now. If you look at the tariffs, the counter retaliatory tariffs, I mean, it's front page news today and yesterday that the retaliatory tariffs have almost been rolled back to nothing. And so, did Canadians really think that they're in for a change and for a new strategy? I guess they did, but
I don't understand. Like you, I look at it and I wonder, how people were so easily fooled. This whole elbows up nonsense, and we've got to have. Yeah, the Canadian. If you noticed on the signs, actually, it was quite interesting that they wrote. I think it was Canada's Party or the Party for Canada, something like that. Anyway, I can't remember what exactly they wrote on the Liberal signs. But the point was that only Mark Carney could stand up to the evil that was Donald Trump, and then he immediately after the election is over, flies down to Washington and immediately bends the knee. I don't see exactly where this.
But he did such a good job. He did such a good job at
What spin that was. I saw it live, and there was he couldn't even put in 3 words. Trump spoke for 30 minutes, and Carney spoke for 3.
And he basically waved in the background like, I'm here too.
Yeah, he kept moving forward on his seat saying, I want to interrupt, I want to say something. And Trump just kept going on and on and on. Anyway, I don't think Canadians are that stupid. I think they're apathetic. I think really that's what it is.
That's a better approach. And I'll retract my frustration and use yours.
So the truth is, the majority of people, regardless of what country you live in, are apathetic toward political issues until it really bites them, and then all of a sudden they're engaged. But in Canada, for the most part, we're living this pretty decent lifestyle, despite the horrible inflation of the last 5 years, and despite the fact that our per capita GDP has been stagnant for an entire decade, and we're ranked 37th out of 38 industrialized nations. But despite all that, Canadians are more or less happy with their lot in life, and at least they don't have that evil monster who's running the country to the south of us, and so people tune into politics for 2 weeks every 4 years. And so they tuned in and they said, okay, the bad guy's gone. This guy seems pretty good, seems pretty smart. We're good with him. And that was it. And I think that it essentially just boiled down to that. But anyway, we got to move off this subject and move it forward. So let's take a look at what the prescription is for the Canadian economy, according to Kim G C Moody.
The prescription? Well, there's from I'll stay in my lane with tax. We need to create policies from a tax perspective that make it easy for the job creators, which are entrepreneurs, to take risks and do their job. Unfortunately, with significant high tax rates, significant complexity, mind-boggling complexity, frankly, including the requirement to comply with these tax laws, is taking our entrepreneurs out of the country. They're incentivized to leave the country and in most cases go to the United States. And so it's something that we really do need to stem. Like we need to stem that tide. And I've written about that in one of my Financial Post articles about a year and a half ago.
So are you talking now about the personal income taxes? Are you talking about corporate taxes? Both?
Both.
So let's start with income taxes.
Sure. Which ones?
Personal income taxes, yeah.
Sorry, Kim, I was just going to say, I actually really liked your, one of the things that you highlighted in your column this week, which was that the Carney government and the CRA are, the CRA is the collection agency, but the Carney government specifically is budgeting for an increase in the amount of tax penalties that people are going to pay. And to me, that says it all right there, that our tax system is way too complex, that they're actually budgeting. They are counting on people making mistakes or doing things wrong or intentionally trying to subvert the tax laws that exist in our country. And they are relying on that as a significant and growing source of income. Can you speak a little bit further on that?
Sure. So I'll comment on that, and then I'll go back to John's question about income tax. But yeah, my column that I wrote last week was, and I finally got around to doing it because it came out in the Liberals' election policy platform, their costing plan, where there's a line item for $3.5 billion of increased penalties. Now, all countries around the world who have a tax system, which is most of them, they have a carrot and stick approach. If you don't comply with tax laws, there's going to be a penalty. Makes sense. And there's, statistically, there's an average number of taxpayers who will not comply or they'll have some footfalls. So you know that there's going to be some penalty line items, but you hope from a policy perspective that that's close to zero. And because otherwise, if you're budgeting for high numbers, then it's like, whoa, what's the ethics here? How can we get those penalties down? And so what really struck me, along with some other tax practitioners and economists, was, hold on a second here. They're actually budgeting for increased penalties of $3.5 billion on overall increased revenues of $52 billion. So if you do that math, it's about 7% of their overall new revenues. 7% just for penalties. That's huge. I had one guy, chirp at me on my article and say, that's a drop in the bucket. Well, with respect, sir, you don't know what you're talking about, because if you're budgeting for penalties, you're budgeting for taxpayers to fail. First of all, it's unethical. Second of all, it's a symptom of the regime. It means that our system is too complex, either statutorily or administratively. And so that was the pushback. And I just, so with respect to what we need to do on personal income tax, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things we need to do, but I'll pick on two of them. First is rates. Our rates are way too high, 54%. There's a reason why you guys don't get superstars in Toronto Maple Leafs, Alex.
Hold on
I'm just kidding. You got some good players there. But there's
You're forgiven.
54% on the high side. Come on. That's craziness. Even in Alberta at 48%, I think that's high.
Listen, in all seriousness, it is a competitive disadvantage. And we've talked about it on previous episodes together, and that you're competing against no tax states. Even the high tax states in the United States are more. You pay less on an income tax basis down there if you were to go to California or New York than you would in Ontario, even though they're the two highest taxed states and provinces on a relative basis in each country. And so that alone is a very uncompetitive disadvantage that we are putting ourselves at.
Well, just to bring it home on that point, who's the captain of the Tampa Bay Lightning that
Victor Hedman or Steven Stamkos?
Steven Stamkos. You remember?
Yeah, I remember he was a free agent and he chose to go to Tampa. Yeah.
Yeah, at a much less salary than what the Leafs are offering. Well, there's a reason for that, right? It's taxes, and so lots written on that issue. But to so that's the first thing is you need to get that down. Combine that with spending cuts, and frankly, the Conservatives, I think, had it right because they proposed a tax reform committee where they were actually going to look at that very thing. How do you bring down tax rates combined with spending cuts? The second thing I think you need to do, which is the obvious, is to reduce the litterance of political tax matters that are in the Income Tax Act, like short-term rental deductions is a prohibition of short-term rental. That's purely political. It makes zero public policy sense. And there's no shortage of the flipping tax, same thing. There's no shortage of ridiculous stuff that makes no sense from a public policy and economic policy perspective, but it makes good politics. You need to get rid of that. And so there's a lot of things, John, that we could do on personal tax, but those are the two obvious ones.
Well, there's so much complexity in the tax system, and they keep creating new and new rules of complexity, which is good for you.
Well, not really. I hate it, and most tax practitioners hate it as well.
But it's billable hours.
Well, we have lots to do. We don't need to be cluttered with that crap. But yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, the paper chase that the average Canadian has to go through, or the average entrepreneur has to go through to stay compliant with CRA, it's insanity. I mean, we are only on this planet for maybe 80 years, and we're wasting probably 5 of those years chasing down receipts. This is not a rational, logical methodology for collecting revenue, and in fact, it's even the whole income tax system conceptually is bankrupt as far as I'm concerned. There should be better ways for funding the minimal amount of government that we require, that we are way past in terms of the size. So, total agreement with you. Yeah. So carry on. And did you complete your thought on income taxes? How about corporate taxes?
Corporate tax, I think, needs a big shakeup. Notwithstanding a lot of radical lefties who think that, that the evil corporations don't pay enough tax. The reality is that corporate tax is just a prepayment of ultimate tax that'll be borne by the individuals, whether it's vis-a-vis pension funds, excuse me, or vis-a-vis capital gains at some point. A lot of people don't understand that.
Yeah, or even employees.
I tell anyone who cares to listen to me that corporations are economic conduits. Everything flows right through them. So you charge a corporation tax, who's going to pay for it? They're going to hire fewer workers. So your employment is going down, or the unemployment rate will go up, the employment will go down, or the company is going to pay out fewer dividends, which affects investors and savers, or the capital gain in the future, because the corporate earnings will be lower, goes down. So at the end, and where companies can pass along the cost in terms of their product or service, they're going to pass it through. So at the end of the day, there's only one taxpayer. It's the individual. And this whole nonsense about corporations have to pay their fair share is exactly that. It's absolute nonsense. I find it comical that Jagmeet Singh and others of his ilk, when they attack the grocery store giants and say that they're corporate greed and they make too much. Do you know what profit margins are on grocery store chains? There's something like very slim, like 3 to 6%. So it's irrational. It demonstrates a lack of knowledge when you make statements like that.
to digress for a second, John, do you know the history of corporate tax?
No.
So here's a little short story for you. So you recall Jagmeet Singh and people of his ilk were calling for excess profits tax on oil and gas companies and technology companies and grocery companies, right? Because they're making too much money, and they go after the CEOs who are greedy. Well, that story has been played numerous times in history. So back in World War One, which I'm sure both of you guys have studied. Our country was quite small back then. I can't remember the exact population, but it was pretty small. I want to say 14 million people or 8 million. I can't remember any, but a
Probably
lot
closer
of
to 8 if I had to guess.
yeah, I think I can't remember off the top of my head. But during World War One, there is a number of people, mostly men, that were called into service. And of course, those men, mostly married, or a lot married. A lot of them were young and single at the time as well. But we're not there to take care of the family. So the women were doing work, and anyhow, to make a long story short, grocery prices went up. Supply, demand, etc. And so there's a narrative pushed by the newspapers at the time, in particular the Globe and Mail, that grocery prices were very, very high. And ultimately, there's a lot of pressure put on the government that they should charge these groceries companies an excess profits tax. And so in 1917, and actually late 1916, they did. They introduced this tax that ultimately, if your profits were over a certain amount, that they would charge you X percent. And I can't remember off the top. I've written about this a fair amount. Well, that didn't last very long. And then shortly thereafter, what happened was they introduced the personal income tax, which was supposed to be temporary. And then this excess profits tax morphed into the existing corporate tax in 1919 and 2021 all the way through. And so that was the start of a corporate income tax from what we have today. And so just a little short story for you. A lot of people don't understand that this whole idea of an excess profits tax has been around forever. But on the corporate side, what I think we need to do, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the population was just under 8 million. To go back to your initial comments, so you're right on the money.
Good. I thought it was in that neighborhood, but what do I think we need to do on the corporate side? I think what we need to do, number one, is reduce rates, which in the whole scheme of things in Alberta at 23%, that's pretty competitive. Combined federal, provincial. Ontario, I think off the top of my head, is 26.5. I'm ignoring the small business rate, but the 26.5, that's pretty high. If we have corporate tax reform or tax reform in general in the United States, which there's a big package released yesterday or the day before, which there'll be a lot of amendments to that, but there'll be some downward pressure on corporate tax, which will make Canada even less competitive. What I think we should do is follow the model of Estonia, which Jack Mintz has written about, and I've written about, and Trevor Toombs has written about, where all corporate tax is deferred if you reinvest in the company. And Estonia's model is very, very broad, whereas Jack's model is you have to invest in business assets as opposed to passive assets. I like that. And you don't pay any corporate tax until the monies from the company are distributed out to the shareholders, either deemed or otherwise. I love that model because that just is a fuel. It's like pouring gasoline onto a fire. You could really accelerate business and reinvestment by doing that. Now, that'll take radical thinking. And
that isn't happening. not with the people in charge.
no, they won't do it. But I'll test you guys. I'll test your knowledge here. So, how much do you think Canada collects in overall tax and other revenues as a country federally?
Are you talking about on a percentage basis or per capita GDP or
the number? What's the number? Dollar amount?
Okay, let me think for a second.
And the latest stats are, I'm going from 2024 year end.
500 billion?
57 billion?
Oh, you're pretty close, John. $549.5 billion. So that's everything. Now, the bulk of that 47% of it, which is 217 billion roughly, is personal tax revenues. So you think about that for a second. That's unbelievable, right? Huge reliance on personal tax. How much do you think we collect in corporate tax of that 549.5 billion?
Of that, well, the other half.
Quarter? Well, no, because there's also got to be consumption tax.
Oh, right.
There's excise, there's carbon taxes, there's levies and fees, etc. Right?
Let's
So
say
a quarter of it?
a third.
82.5 billion, which is about 17%. So the whole scheme of things, it's material, but nothing compared to the rest. GST. How much do you think the country collects in GST?
Well, let's say 70 billion.
You're a little high, about 52 billion.
Okay.
All right. Now keep those numbers in the back of your head for a second. How much do you think that we pay in public debt charges on our debt?
Oh, it's
annually?
a big number.
It's 50. It's the same number as the GST. It's about $56 billion.
Yeah, it's budgeted to be roughly around 60 billion this year.
Okay.
And with the increased carny spending, it'll be a lot more than that. So last question for you, just take a guess. How much do you think the federal government transfers to the provinces in health transfers? In other words, for the provinces to provide healthcare services?
I think it's 25% of their revenue, right? So what would that be? 100 billion?
No, that's way high.
Way high.
It's about 60 billion as well, is it not?
It's close to that. Yeah, it's roughly the same amount as the public debt charges. So when you put all that in perspective, we have 217 billion out of 549 being personal tax, way over reliance. We got GST that is basically being collected to pay our public debt charges. We've got corporate taxes of 82.5, which again is almost, it's not quite there, but very close in being used to pay our public debt charges. And also it's in excess, or sorry, the public debt charges are in excess of our health transfers. There's a real problem here, right?
Yeah.
And there's a message there. And the message, in my view, is one, we need to get control of our public debt charges. Two, we need to become less reliant on personal tax. Three, we need to become more reliant on consumption tax, GST. And four, our corporate tax it's a pittance comparatively. Should it be more? I don't think so. So anyhow, there you go.
Jack Mintz has been talking about this for decades, has he not?
Yes.
That we need to go to consumption. And I agree we need a consumption tax model, because when you have a consumption tax model, even though it's regressive in nature, it engages everyone. Everyone feels the pain. And so you disincentivize politicians from spending too much money, because when even the little guy is paying consumption taxes, he's saying, I'm going to vote for the politician who's going to promise to spend less, not more. But now they're incentivized to vote for the politician who spends more, because the bottom 50% of society doesn't pay any income taxes, or effectively doesn't pay any. So, yeah, this is an old conversation with people like Jack Mintz and others, and it's we're not making any headway, because we just reelected the same government that has had already three terms,
which is the problem, right?
And we're not getting it. We're just not.
Going back to the consumption tax, though, is it really regressive? In that, I understand why people refer to it as a regressive tax. However, you're paying on a proportionate basis to the amount that you consume. So it is a more equitable way of paying, because everybody is paying. The old saying is everybody's got to pay their fair share. Well, we've talked about this before. What's the fair share?
The argument against that, though, Alex, which I actually subscribe to, is that if I'm low income, and let's say I'm paying 5%, and let's say it's across the board, because there are some advocates that say that it should be on everything you consume, then if I go to the grocery store and I am paying $100 for groceries, that 5%, for example, assuming it, or let's just say it's 10, it costs me a lot more. It hurts a lot more at that 10% because my income is so low, as opposed to Alex, who's a multi-gazillionaire, and that 10% means nothing, right? Or
things worked out all right.
Can I work for you, Alexander?
So
It's all tied up in real estate.
Oh no! Oh no! Next subject.
Yes, I understand. Yeah. All right.
right, and so what I think, kudos to Brian Mulroney and his team, Michael Wilson, back in the day when they developed the GST. They thought pretty hard about the whole regressivity of the GST, and so what did they do? They exempted. They did two things, which I think were really smart. They exempted GST from the cost of living, rent, groceries, healthcare, education, certain clothing, and to combine all that, they sent out checks, as for the lower income. I think one could debate whether or not the checks and the credits are really worthwhile. But I think in the whole scheme of things, when you combine the credits with the exemptions, that really does take that regressivity and push it way down. And so I think it's a very good system that other countries like New Zealand, if I remember correctly, have copied and learned a lot from our system. So do I think it's regressive? No, certainly a lot less than it could be. And I think, if anything, our GST rate should be a lot higher.
Right. I agree, because I
Commensurately, if the GST is higher, income taxes need to come down.
Absolutely. Not a double dip. No, absolutely.
correct. So going back to your discussion, Kim, on the tax on house flipping and the prohibition of deductions on short-term rentals.
Yeah.
Please explain why that is such a ridiculous notion, because a lot of people heard that when it came out a few years ago, because we have a real estate crisis in this country, and they said, great, everything's good, they're going to fix it, we're not going to get any more foreign buyers or people buying short-term rental properties, and they're going to sit on it and yada yada yada. And explain why this is such a ridiculous exemption or prohibition.
I can't recall if I talked about this the last time I was a guest in your podcast, using the drug dealer example. Did I talk about that?
No,
or no,
we didn't.
No. Okay. Well, here's the example. And by the way, the whole approach on real estate, including the flipping tax, which I'll talk about in a minute, is a boogeyman approach. Obviously, these people are the ones that are causing, the housing problem, and let's use the tax system to attack it.
It's not
And
the
so
massive influx of immigration that we have that far outstrips our ability to build houses.
Exactly. So let's conveniently forget about that, and for political reasons, let's go after the boogeymen. And so in this case, the boogeymen are those damn short-term rental owners, or as I call them, the people that don't like it are NIMBYs. I don't want a short-term rental in my backyard. They're loud and they're partiers, and so.
So short-term rental would be anyone who has an Airbnb would be considered short-term rental, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And so those damn people who operate, and I lived this in a cottage property that I had previously. It was in a strata development in British Columbia. And boy, oh boy, that's, the locals did not want Airbnbs because they're so noisy and they're disruptive to the community. And none of it made any public policy sense. It was all NIMBY, not in my backyard stuff, which is exactly what this short-term rental stuff. So if you are now happen to be a short-term rental owner operating in a jurisdiction like Kelowna, for example, or Vancouver, that prohibits short-term rentals, then any expenses that you have with respect to that short-term rental are denied. No deduction. So the example I use in writing and in my lectures on this. So Alex, you've got a bit of a cocaine problem, right? You're yeah. So
my high earning lifestyle has caught up with me.
Yeah, but you like cocaine so much, you decide you're a dealer, so you're going to sell it. Whereas John is an Airbnb owner and he's operating in a jurisdiction that prohibits it. So you make $10,000 selling cocaine, and John makes $10,000 renting out his Airbnb. Do you think, which by the way, Alex, you are a criminal for selling cocaine. That's a criminal activity. And if you don't report that $10,000 on your tax return, that's a criminal offense as well. That's tax evasion. So you come to me and you say, hey, Kim, I understand that my activities are criminal, but I don't want to be charged with tax evasion because that's how they caught, a number
Al
of
Capone.
people. Yeah. And so I want to file my tax return. Now, that's very rare, I can tell you, but it has happened in my career. Yeah, but it has happened in my career. So you come to me and you say, report this on my tax return. So I do, but you've got $8,000 of expenses. You've got a little dealer network going, you got cell phones, etc. And the cost of the snow is, let's say it's 8,000. Are you able to deduct that $8,000
Absolutely.
legally?
Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
you are. There's nothing in the Income Tax Act that prohibits the deduction of criminal activities. Because frankly, the Income Tax Act, yep, nothing. The Income Tax Act is agnostic to the source of income. They don't give a shit if it's illegal income or not. Now, John, you earn the same $10,000, but you're doing it quasi illegally because you're operating in a jurisdiction, let's say it's Kelowna, that doesn't prohibit it. But you just need to make a living because you've got costs here, right? And so you got the same $8,000 of expenses, property taxes, insurance, what have you. Are you able to deduct that now?
Yeah. Aren't I?
No.
No, the answer is
No.
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 So you're going to pay tax on $10,000. Whereas good old Alex is a criminal and he's only paying tax on two. Now, tell me from a public policy perspective that makes sense.
Absolutely not.
You're putting the criminal on a better public policy footing than a legitimate entrepreneur who happens to be civilly disobeying the rules because he needs to make a living. That makes zero sense. It's pure politics. It's dangerous, and it needs to go away. So that's the first thing. Do you want me to comment on the flipping tax?
Absolutely. But before you do that, I need to announce my resignation. I'm flying to Colombia. I'm going to go for a business trip. Come back. I'll be back in 6 weeks.
You'll be
Don't look at my
lucky to
suitcase.
you'll be lucky to get out alive.
Yeah, exactly.
I know people.
So the second thing is the flipping tax. So the example I always use is my uncle. Back in the 1980s, Alex, you were too young, but
He didn't exist. He
I
didn't
didn't
exist in the
yet.
80s.
1991 is the established date for this entity.
There you go.
For anyone involved in hockey, that's the general terminology. Is what's your son? Oh, he's a 91.
Yeah. Well, I'm a lot older than you, but that's okay. I remember the National Energy Program of Trudeau Sr.
Oh, I remember that myself.
And I lived in Alberta. I lived in Fort McMurray, of all places, during that time. Grew up in Fort McMurray.
Are you still getting treatment?
Yeah, there's a reason why Albertans generally don't like, especially the older ones, don't like liberals, right? And so, anyhow, long story short, property values tanked, and mortgage interest rates were high, blah, blah, blah. And then finally we have a new government and property values start to increase in post 1983. So 1984, 5, 6, 7. My uncle, living in Red Deer, thought that he was quite the real estate mogul, and he thought he understood the principal residence exemption. And so what he did is he bought and sold and moved into 11 homes in the span of about 3 years with his young family. And he made money out of every single one. And he didn't report any of the income.
Oh, dear.
Because he lived under the mythology that as long as you live in the house for a day, then you've ordinarily inhabited the property. And therefore, any profits are without tax. So stand back and think about that for a second. Are you able to claim the principal residence exemption when you buy and sell for 11 times? Well, the short answer is no, you're not. And what's the reason why? The reason why is because when he acquired the property, he didn't acquire the property as a capital property. He acquired it with the intent of flipping it. which under normal tax and accounting principles, he's acquiring it as inventory. And when you acquire property as inventory, that is not a capital property, and any inventory profits are fully taxable. That principle has been around forever in Canadian tax law. And in order to claim the principal residence exemption, your property first needs to be a capital property. And then there's a whole bunch of other requirements. And so he failed that. But there is no requirement to disclose it because the CRA had this policy that if you are disposing of a property and claiming the principal residence exemption, no need to disclose it. Well, they changed that in 2016, thankfully. Had nothing to do with the Liberal government. The CRA just finally woke up. And so, but then fast forward, they introduced this flipping tax saying, hey, if obviously the boogeyman, causing housing problems is these damn house flippers. And so if you hold the property for less than 12 months, we're just going to make all that not taxable, or sorry, fully taxable and not eligible for the principal residence exemption. Well, go back to my uncle. Existing law already provides for that. You didn't need this objective standard of a year. And there's exceptions to this year. And one of them is if you get divorced or if you die or if your safety is threatened. So Alex, I buy a house and I move next door to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't shovel my driveway, my sidewalk. So you come to me one day and say, listen, you son of a bitch, if you don't shovel your sidewalk, I'm going to kill you. And so I sell my house within 6 months and I make some money. Well, apparently that's an exception. But how do you prove that?
Well, I am a drug dealer, so I'm the drug kingpin of Mississauga. I have some pretty big muscle in my
body
pocket.
body cam.
Yeah. So these so-called life exceptions, to the flipping tax, totally ridiculous. Anyhow, to make a long story short, that kind of stuff needs to go away. All these silly political boogeyman type housing measures, and there's more, need to go away.
Agreed. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, Kim, before we get into some of the, actually a couple different things. I wanted to get into the Adam Smith Wealth of Nations tenants, and I wanted to get into the Liberals tax plan. But one of the things I believe I read in one of your articles was that the unions don't pay any tax. How is that possible?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because one of my colleagues at my firm, this is probably eight or 9 years ago, decided to take her master's in tax at Osgood, and her thesis was about the history of the taxation of unions. And so she had me read her paper, and number one, it was very informative, and two, it's clear to me that unions should be taxed. And right now, they take advantage of the non-taxation and accumulate a lot of wealth and use a lot of that wealth for political purposes, which is, in my view, silly.
Exactly. Oh, not only silly, it's quite frankly, it's bordering on theft. You're taking money from your union members and you're redistributing it for your own political gain, so you can try and influence how they vote and how other people vote when you have no business commenting on how other people should be voting.
The teachers unions do this all the time.
Yeah, and that's what bothers me.
It's unethical. It's unethical because not all teachers wish to vote in a particular way, and to take their union dues and funnel it into a political party is just simply unethical.
Yeah. So let's steer away from that aspect of it. And one of the things that you've touched upon in some of your articles that I think would be appropriate here would be, if we were to rebuild our tax system, you suggested that Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations tenants would be a good starting point or a good framework. Can you describe what those are for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. And for those who don't know Adam Smith, he wrote, I think it was 1787 or something like that. In that neighborhood, wrote The Wealth of Nations. Excellent book. And in that book, he talks about what is the good tenets of a tax system. And ultimately, number one, there's 4 tenets. Number one is equity and fairness, that it should be fair. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I hate how that word has been politicized over the years, but his proposition is the wealthier should pay more, and I don't disagree with that, and that's why we have a progressive tax system. But you can tip the scales too far, and I think we have done that in Canada. It's too much. And number two is certainty. When you file your taxes, it should be certain that that's what you pay. There should not be a lot of uncertainty, because otherwise, you could lose sleep at night. It's hard to budget from a government's perspective, and even personally. Three is convenience. It should be simple to comply. Well, as we all know and we've talked about, it's not simple to comply, and it's very expensive to comply. You have to, hire expensive accountants and lawyers in many cases to comply. And then last is efficiency. It shouldn't cost the government more money or a ton of money to collect the tax and to administer the tax system. And again, I think we've gone way over on that. In Canada, we have, 5 years ago, we had 29,000 CRA employees. Today, it's almost double that.
Yeah.
And it's by far the largest government bureaucracy. It's an important one for sure.
Yeah.
But it's expensive.
In the last 3 years, one of you, you touched upon in one of your articles that the budget has increased 62% in the last 3 years alone, which is absolutely astronomical, and speaks to just how broken our tax collection and tax administration system is. But anyway,
I would have no problem with the increase in budget if we saw material benefits from it. But if, for example, have you ever tried to phone the CRA?
Yes.
Recently?
It is an absolute travesty.
Yeah, good luck.
It's in an exercise in frustration and anger, as you can tell from my quivering voice. I get really angry because I have to call them from time to time to speak to them either on a personal basis or to discuss things relating to clients and other CRA policies, and to find somebody who will give you correct information. Sometimes I called them and somebody blatantly gave me wrong information, and I knew it was wrong, and I said, "Are you sure about this? This cannot be correct." And they assured me up and down that it was correct. I hung up the phone, I called back, and I spoke to somebody else. I said, "I just spoke to someone who said this to me. Is that accurate? Because I can't imagine that's true." And they said, "No, absolutely not." And so that is a big concern.
Yeah, I could go on, and I have in some of my articles about how pouring more money onto the system is not the answer. We just need to do a much better job. In the last budget, I think there was, I can't remember the exact number. I want to say north of 200 million to improve the telephone system of the CRA. Yeah, right. It's gotten a hell of a lot worse.
How many slush funds have we discovered in the government over the last 10 years?
The whole system, from what I can see, is designed to basically quash phone calls as opposed and kill them, as opposed to make it easier to get hold of it. It's just silly stuff.
Yeah. Well, with all that being said, I think there's a lot more that we'd like to get into the tax stuff. There's maybe one question, but perhaps I will pose it to you on the other side of our break here, Kim, and that is relating to some of the tax policies that could be implemented by the Liberal government, because it's something that we've talked about and that you've talked about at great length. Things like we've already touched upon the increased tax penalties, but could the capital gains tax increase be revisited? Wealth tax, carbon taxes reintroduced, home equity tax. Those are potential consequences that we could be looking at in the next 2 to 4 years, and we'd like to get your feedback on it. But to give respect to the timeline that we've gone on in terms of the length of this portion of the podcast, I think we'll wrap up here, and we'll touch upon that before we get into our next topic of discussion, which is the Alberta separatist movement.
Do you want me to talk quickly about what I could see, or just suspend for later?
We'll suspend for the next episode in a couple minutes here, so I'll let Bill wrap up.
Let's suspend this. Let's suspend this into part 2. Give people a reason to be sure that they're around. Okay. Which is all the reason more. If you're listening to this podcast, you're not a subscriber, to become one. Hit the follow button. Then you won't miss part 2 of this discussion, which has been entertaining and promises only to get a little bit more entertaining, as a matter of fact. John and Alex, for people who are listening who don't know you and are maybe want to reach out to you to have a conversation with you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Best ways for them to send us an email, info@medwealth.ca. That's info@med-wealth.ca.
Fantastic. That's great. Please do that. Reach out. I would also ask, if you like the podcast, like it. Tell people about it. It's really simple. Word of mouth promotion is terrific. Don't miss part 2. What might happen? And my favorite topic of all time, always, the separatist movement within the great country of Canada, and what, if anything, might become of it. We'll catch you on that episode. Be right back.
Thank you for listening to Prescribing Prosperity. Visit our website at med-wealth.ca. That's med-wealth.ca for more information or to connect with us for a consultation. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the hosts and their guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of IPC Securities Corporation. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investment advice. Always seek the advice of a qualified and licensed financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment or retirement planning. MedWealth Financial Services can provide a private consultation to help you determine the suitability of any guidance discussed on the show.